Punch cartoons. History of Punch cartoons. Punch magazine was first published in 1841. Inspired by French satirical publication La Charivari, Ebenezer Landels and Henry Mayhew began their own in London, England. While the inspiration for Punch came from its French counterpart, Landels wanted this magazine to have a lighter feel to it and insisted it be less bitter than La Charivari. An unnamed source made the analogy that it would be like a good punch, nothing without lemon, which also happened to be the surname of Punch's first editor. Punch was widely regarded as maintaining the ability to capture the essence of the many eras through which it endured. It had so much influence that it is known today as being one of the first satire publications, as well as the direct reason we call cartoons as such today. While it lost the readership and popularity it maintained for many decades towards the end, Punch as a brand lasted until its dissolution in 2002. Scene from the American Tempest. The scene from the American Tempest was published in Punch on January 24th, 1863, 23 days after the Emancipation Proclamation. While most of Punch's satire was based around insult and caricature of contemporary politicians, this one was unusual in that it painted Lincoln in a positive light without deprecation. Favor towards the Union shows through in this cartoon as a Confederate soldier is depicted as pouting in the background like a young child, while Lincoln, dressed in a Union uniform, stands sure of himself, content in handing the now freed black man the proclamation. Using what Punch decided sounds like a Southern African American vernacular dialect, the subtext reads as a monologue coming from the newly freed slave, called Sambo. "You beat him nother, massa. Very little time, I'll beat him too." And the remark is signed Shakespeare. While the publication was clearly sympathizing with Lincoln's North, they still wanted to make it clear they believed emancipation did not equal equality, or even full humanization for that matter. Using the term Sambo ensured the depiction of subhumanity. The Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia says a Sambo was depicted as a perpetual child, not capable of living as an independent adult. The coon acted childish, but he was an adult, albeit a good-for-little adult. Sambo was portrayed as a loyal and contented servant. Indeed, Sambo was offered as a defense for slavery and segregation, definitely not a term a pro-civil rights publication would want to use. Punch also clarified that Sambo's quote was a translation from Shakespeare, one of the most well-known influencers of modern proper English, into black speech. Time period of Punch cartoon. On January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln declared the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all enslaved people in the states rebelling against the Union. Sadly, this document only applied to the Confederacy slaves, not the enslaved people still in the border states that stayed loyal to the Union. The proclamation changed Lincoln's views on slavery. The Emancipation redefined the Civil War, and it was a turning point for focusing the war from strictly preserving the Union to ending American slavery. Lincoln personally hated slavery and saw it as immoral. He saw African Americans as humans and thought they should all be treated equally. Lincoln did not believe that the Constitution gave the federal government the allowance to abolish slavery where it had already existed. He thought he had no purpose, directly or indirectly, of interfering with slavery where it had already existed. However, he wanted to prevent the spread of slavery in the new states that were coming in from the West. Lincoln first insisted that the war was not about freeing the slaves, but preserving the Union. 4 border slave states remained on the Union side during the war, and before emancipation, Northerners generally opposed abolition for fear of losing their jobs to the newly freed slaves. At this time, hundreds of enslaved people were fleeing to the Union. In July 1862, Congress passed the Militia Act. The Militia Act allowed African Americans to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces as laborers. Lincoln tried to get the border states to agree to a gradual emancipation policy, but he failed to convince them. On September 17, 1862, Union troops halted the advancement of Confederate forces at the Battle of Antietam. Days later, he went public about the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This called all Confederate states to rejoin the Union in 100 days or their slaves would become free. In January 1863, Lincoln signed the proclamation, which never included general emancipation nor compensation for enslaved immigration and colonization. Lincoln sadly never freed any of the 4 million slaves during his lifetime, and slavery would not be officially abolished in the United States until the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865, months after his assassination.